There, friends, and welcome to the behind the scenes recording of the Self Employed Life podcast. You get first dibs on this amazing content because the actual podcast won't be out for weeks. But hey, you get to see unedited version. We don't make a whole lot of mistakes, but hey, it could happen. It could happen. All right, so we're gonna get into this. You may have noticed that the tagline here on our show is business with a soul. I have always believed in the integration of mindset, purpose, and doing all the inner work as part of our businesses. In fact, I've also said many times that I always turn to personal development first in order to develop my business. So today we're going to be talking all about mindset and doing the impossible. Jason Drees is a husband, father of 4 boys. Imagine that. Entrepreneur, speaker, performance coach, and author of Do the Impossible. Unlock your full potential with the power of mindset. Jason has an uncanny ability to rewire the mindsets of those he works with and to push his clients to unlock their full potential and experience extraordinary growth in all areas of their lives. And he's here to do the same for us today. Jason, welcome.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Excited to be here, and that's a big bio. I believe that's me.
It is indeed. I know. I feel the same way when I'm a guest. I'm like, really, who is that guy? That's awesome. But you know what? All right. So the book, Do the Impossible. Let's start off with redefining impossible, because right off the bat, as soon as you say do the impossible, impossible implies unobtainable.
Yeah.
And you say nothing is impossible. It's just an uncommon target. I really embrace the idea of common target idea. That seems to be the root of thinking big, right? That we have to kind of turn the impossible into just saying it's just an uncommon target. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, as a professional coach coming on close to 10 years of coaching now, I started to realize from coaching all different types of clients, some would go aim at small targets and some would aim at big targets. And then I started to think about it more and more, and I started to realize that the only difference between aiming at a target of like 100 or a target of 500 or a target of 1,000 is simply the strategy it takes to get there. And at the same time, I know me, you, and your listeners, we're Americans, we're Westerners, we're not afraid of hard work, right? So we're not afraid of the work to aim at the different targets. And what I started to find is that people started to aim at targets that were based on their comfort zone and not aiming at targets as what actually is possible or what even's impossible, because the difference is simply just a strategy. That's it.
Yeah. And how does expectations wrap into this? Because I've talked about expectations a fair amount. It's a part of my TEDx talk. Like,
Yeah.
by definition, expectation is a predetermined outcome. Like, you've already determined the outcome, right? So how does expectations and how do you help your clients kind of break through their own expectation barriers to actually go bigger?
That's a great point, Jeffrey. I believe that expectations, like our results, usually fall within the realm of your expectations. That's usually the way it works. Now, the challenge that we have is that, so we know our expectations create our reality, they create our success. The challenge is, how do we get clearly aligned expectations? Because what I've found is that you may have a client who will be 80% aligned with a big target and then 20% in doubt because their expectations based on past references. So most of us are moving forward out of alignment and trying to overcome misalignment with hard work.
Absolutely, the hard work part. We're going to talk about that, but you just got me really curious about that ratio. And I'm a guy who likes science and research and facts, along with the spiritual side of life. I like both,
me too.
right? I think a lot of us do. But I mean, it's natural to have some doubt, right? But have you found that there's, like you just said, 80-20, common rule in a lot of areas in business, and you may have just taken off the top of your head. But even as we're moving forward with the biggest dreams possible, it's natural to have a little doubt, right? But do you find there's a tipping point where there's too much doubt, and about what ratio might that be?
Well,
or am I wrong? Like, now I'm wondering, am I wrong? Should we have no doubt? I mean, that in itself seems impossible.
Well, it depends on what level of reality you want to play in, right?
Okay.
Because I've found there's different levels of awareness of our life. We're also going through a really big change in the world right now, right? A radical change. The tools that I use with clients didn't exist 5 years ago. They just discovered them 5 years ago. So my ability to shift clients has changed based on my ability to get clients to an elevated frequency. And so I believe it is possible to be without doubt 100%. Wow. The simplest way to do that is to make a decision, right? So you can change your expectations. Like, let's say your expectation is I'm going to grow my business, or I'm going to become self-employed, or I'm going to not just be self-employed surviving, I'm going to be self-employed thriving.
Mhm.
And how do I know I'm going to do that? Because I'm not going to stop until I do.
So let's talk about the big picture. You just said something else that really intrigued me, and I've been in business for 38 years. I know,
Yeah.
obviously, I started really young, but no, it sounds like crazy long at this point in my life to say
Yeah.
38 years. But the fact of the matter is, in that time, there have been a couple, but almost really, I'd say a couple of really fundamental changes in the way the world operates. And I'm kind of curious as to, you just alluded to this big shift. Like, how would you define that? Like I said, I clearly, after 38 years of just being a masterful observer, sitting back and watching, there are
Yeah.
kind of two really fundamental shifts that we have seen in human behavior that
Yeah.
speak a lot to success today. I'm kind of curious what you've observed.
From my point of view is really, we talk about business coaching, we talk about success all the time, but like 80% of what I do is personal alignment. It's just applied to business. What I've discovered is that, and I believe we're operating at a different level of consciousness. We're operating at a different frequency of a reality. And the simplest way I can describe this is I'll give you a simple graphic, and I'll use my hands to do it because I have a unique experience as a coach, and I've actually seen the changes. So for example, I used to work for Tony Robbins. I was a Tony Robbins coach for about 4 years, and we would talk about mindset and goals, right? So imagine my little diagram here. I'm going to draw a circle that says action. Okay. Now we know that action gives us the results, so we're always chasing actions as human beings. Now, if we're smart enough to know the action isn't working, we need to change our thinking. So let's draw a circle around this that's called mindset. So a mindset called circle and a mindset called action. And when the mindset isn't aligned with the target, it creates an aligned strategy, and then it will create an aligned action, and you hit the target. But what happens if the mindset is out of alignment, right? And what I've found over time is when I was a Tony Robbins coach and I'd be coaching somebody who had a small business and they weren't generating income, I'd be like, well, why don't you cold call? And they're like, I don't like cold calling because I don't like being rejected. And as a coach, I would say, well, what kind of dad are you going to be if you don't follow through? So I would force misaligned action by creating negative leverage, right? And that's how I coached for years and years and years. Then and there were times where I would coach two clients. One client had a limited financial mindset, and the other client had a limited financial mindset. I coached them the exact same way. And over the next 90 days, the first person started making more money and the second person didn't. And it wasn't for like literally 5 years later until I actually discovered why. At the end of 2020, I discovered that in addition to action and mindset, I just discovered there's another circle around here. This circle here, I call frame. What I actually think that is, I actually think it's the vibratory frequency of you as a human being, because our body are made of atoms. It's energy interacting with an energetic reality. So what I've discovered is that when I started to discover frame, I realized that, and you think about it this way, like action comes from your hands, right? Your mindset is your mind, your brain, which is not you, it's a part of you. The frame is all of you, right? And what I've discovered is that when you align your frame with the target, it automatically then creates an aligned mindset, because mindset is actually the byproduct of frame. And then it creates aligned action. And this wasn't possible 10 years ago. And if you look at Tony Robbins content, a lot of Tony Robbins content, I love Tony Robbins. His content's about repetition, integration, stuff like that. Because if you're trying to create change at the three-dimensional level in your body, you literally have to physically condition it into your brain. When we're operating at the frame level, the ownership level, you're literally shifting to a version of reality that's in alignment versus trying to solve the version of reality that's out of alignment.
All right, so we're going to need to. I know this is so awesome, and we're going to need to give I think our listeners a little bit more of a how to do that in a moment.
I
But
will.
what I think is also intriguing, though, I people have asked me this too. They said, well, I think a lot of people find it hard to believe that that's actually changed. Like, we think we humans are just the way we
Yeah.
were centuries ago. And what you're saying, this has changed in the last 10 years. And I would agree with you, like I said, but if I can identify two major changes that I've seen in my 38 years of being in business, which is a position of observation.
Yeah.
And let's face it, I was also a photographer. I've been a photographer for 38 years. I'm in the business of observation. And and then that translates into being a coach, same role,
Yeah.
observation, right? And without a doubt, to me, what I refer to as the distinguishable difference is that we humans are operating on a more energetic level than we did 10 years ago. And yeah, I say, and I break it down even to saying how, as I coach my small business clients and say,
Mhm.
that's important for you to understand because it's also part of how people are choosing you. They're choosing you now because of how they energetically align and feel
Yes.
about you and what your business represents, more than whether you're the best at what you do.
Yeah.
And that is a fundamental shift in the past 10 years that people are making an energetic decision on
Yes.
who they choose, how they live, how they move forward. And like I said, I think it's important to put that aside because people can't imagine that we humans have changed that much in 10 years. But I really think we have.
Absolutely, right? And the way I share this idea with clients is I go simply, let's explore an idea, right? Like you can decide if it's a truth later, but let's start with an idea. Like we know that life responds to us. Sometimes life goes great and we get deal after deal, and sometimes we can't make anything happen. And what I've found is like, my favorite question is like, okay, so let's say you were the being or the thing that created all of this life, universe, and everything. Would you give these energetic beings a way to make reality react to them? Maybe that sounds like, yeah, unless you have a sense of humor, right? Of course. Okay. So we have an energetic attraction based universe with energetic beings whose frequency is shifting the version of reality they operate in. Like, okay, that kind of makes sense. And then what I started to notice is that I can clearly see the difference between in 2015, when I started to understand these concepts, there were times when it would take me almost 6 months of coaching to get a client to see this perspective. Today, I can get anybody there in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Anybody.
Yeah. And I think, especially if this audience is self-employed business owners, and you alluded to it earlier, and I've been saying it for quite some time, is that this is not just your success is not just about hard work,
Yeah.
right? And that has been the default mode,
Yeah.
which is why this has changed. So if it's not hard work, let's talk about this framing, right?
Yeah.
Because this is the doing or the being part, right? I mean, this is the
Yeah.
understanding. So let's dive into that a little bit more. How if we don't achieve our level of success that we're going for entirely through hard work, which I agree with, it's not entirely. Yes, you still have to, there's action applied, but it's not entirely hard work.
Yeah.
How are we how are we meeting that up and marrying it with the frame, and how do we put context to that frame?
So let me comment real quick on the hard work, right? Because if hard work created success, we'd all be billionaires, right?
Good
Because
point.
we know that hard work doesn't create success. Hard work, like what actually creates success is alignment with success. Hard work increases your opportunity and chances to get in alignment with success. That's what I found in my life.
Yeah. Okay.
When you start in success, you're going to be much more successful than starting thinking I'm not successful yet. So it's like starting in alignment, right? The thing to understand is you're always in a frame. You're never not in a frame. You're always in a frame. And the simplest way when I first talk about framing is your expectations is your frame. So it's like, well, okay, so I understand, Mr. Small Business Owner, you're growing, expanding your business. What are your expectations? What are my positive expectations and what are your overall expectations? That'll dictate what the frame is, right? And because the challenge we have is our brain is a computer that catalogs everything prior to this moment.
Mhm.
So as we move forward, it's comparing everything going past. And one of the big challenges with that is what we think are our keys to success, like our old success formulas. Those are literally the limitations of our future.
Yes.
So the simplest way to start with frame, like a decision, a firm decision is a frame. I am going to create a small business to support my family because I'm not going to stop until I do. That's a frame as well.
Okay. And how does perspective work into this? When I think of the frame, is it because to your point earlier,
Mhm.
our perspective is often also an accumulation of previous events that form our perspectives. How does perspective roll into frame?
You can sometimes I'll use perspective interchangeably with frame to help people
Okay.
understand, like, right? Um, but perspective is more at the mindset level, right? It's in the mind, so that's a part of it. Now, once the frame is aligned, then the mindset has to take the action. And kind of the way it makes sense to me is that, okay, my body, I know this body is made of atoms. They told me in seventh grade science it's made of atoms. It's pure energy. So the frequency of this body determines the frequency of my brain, which determines which thoughts I have. And I've also had experiences where I have really clear, powerful thoughts, and I have times when I have sad, depressing, helpless thoughts. Like we have an entire range. And I've understood. So and what we're really talking about, it is the law of attraction, but I don't say law of attraction because when I hear law of attraction, I think of like meditating under a tree, waiting for the Amazon truck. Right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when you understand how life works, it's like you as a being get into a frequency. And if it's an alignment with the target, you will then start thinking aligned thoughts, have naturally inspired action. You'll have motivation. You'll take the action, and that will deliver the process of getting what you want.
So let me ask you this, and this is a tough one because I know those of us, when we experience alignment, we totally get what you're saying,
Yeah.
right? But if we're not experiencing the feelings of alignment, it's harder to grasp what you're saying. So I want to speak to that person for a moment so that we can help them. Because, like I
Yeah.
said, I mean, you could just energetically feel like you are aligned and like for some hard work, no matter if it's hard, you feel like you have a wind to your back.
Yeah.
It's just right. There's this swoosh to the way that you're living. And, I thankfully had a year in 2020, 2021, even those 2 years, like such alignment that other people were saying to me, how are you getting so much done? And I kept saying, and I'm working less than I ever have. Like
Yeah.
it
Yes.
was just like this swoosh to the back. It was just like everything was just clicking and falling into place. Um, and admittedly, I feel, recently I've been like a little out of alignment because I got to a place, right? So we're
Yeah.
always resetting that alignment too. But I'm more concerned about the person who hasn't had the benefit of truly feeling that. And how do we help them find that alignment?
Well, step one is making a decision to find alignment, right? Step one is always
Okay.
the decision, right? So, yes, I'm going to make a decision to move into a place of alignment. The second thing you need to start doing is what we were conditioned not to do is start to pay attention to your emotions because your emotions is your guidance system. That is the system. Like most of the business that I'm doing right now in my business, and I grew my business 10x in 2021, in 2020 to 2021, I grew it 10x. And it was like literally, I'm following my emotions. So you need to follow your guidance system. And a simple way, like here's actually how to shift frames. So if you have a person who's feeling resistance right now, here's what you do. Can you just imagine a version of you in the future at any time, next week, next year, 10 years from now? Can you imagine a version of you in the future who's in alignment, in a greater degree of alignment than you are right now? And as soon as you sense that version, you just literally hold it for 30 seconds and you'll start to shift. And the simple example I'll give you of frame shifting is we do it all the time as human beings. We'll be driving in our car. We'll hear a song from 20 years ago. We'll think about something we did and have a bad memory, and then we'll feel bad. That's a frame shift. That's a negative frame shift. So it's basically we can direct our focus to a negative thought and we'll feel negative. And what I'm showing people how to do is to direct their focus to an elevated, more aligned, more powerful, more abundant frequency. So stuff starts to flow from that.
It's interesting. You're reminding me of an exercise in Marshall Goldsmith's new book, Unearned Life.
Mm-hmm.
He provides an exercise that I did. I found it to be very powerful. It is very much aligned with what you're saying, which again also means something to me. I always say, one of the things we can always do is pay attention to where you're hearing similar messages from multiple sources.
Yes.
And that, right, that is imperative to see truth. And, what you're saying is also appearing in Marshall Goldsmith's book. And one of the exercises he offers is imagine jumping ahead to your future. Pick a time frame, 10 years, 15 years. I mean, I think one would choose a time frame probably based on their own age. So jump ahead to that future and write yourself a thank you letter for what you're doing right now. And I found it to be really powerful to imagine, to jump ahead to that future state.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to stay present right now is to kind of look back and say 10 years from now, I would be thanking myself for doing what right now?
Mhm.
And it's similar to what you're saying. It's like this
It is.
jumping ahead, right? And
Yeah.
looking back, and really powerful. Like I said, anytime we see similar messages coming from multiple sources, it is your opportunity to wake up to a shift.
That's life talking to you.
Yeah.
And when you start to dial into, and I think the number one thing that what I would attribute my success from going from literally my business in 2019 was 100 grand in revenue. In 2020, I did 1 million. Last year I did 2.8, went from me to 30 employees in 18 months. Like, and really it happened because I started working with life. And it's interesting because there are times when I will hear something I absolutely needed to hear from someone I know that's completely out of character for them to say.
Yeah.
So life is like, life gives you that input. So really, are you listening?
Yeah, 100%. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between alignment and control,
Mhm.
because we're talking about alignment, and
Yeah.
by nature, many of us are kind of controlling in order to succeed, right? It's an old message, right?
Yeah.
But and for some, I think there can be a fine line. To me, there's almost no comparison, but that's because I've done the work. But I can see other people getting more caught up in alignment and controlling, kind of collapsing almost to the degree that they're trying to control circumstances to find alignment, which to me sounds exactly like, I'll be happy when I've achieved something. Like, I'll have alignment after I've controlled the hell out of it. It doesn't
Yeah.
work that way. So break that down, the difference between alignment and control.
Well, what I can control is between these two ears and they always can't even control that. Like anything external, we can't control. We have influence. Now, another concept that I talk about is known and unknown, right? Like if I know what my business is and know how to do it, I could push it and grow at 10%. What I'm really talking about is we start to explore impossible things we don't know how to do. So if you want to start playing at an exponential level, and instead of growing your business 10%, grow at 1,000%, that's where life needs to come into play. And I have found, and I tried controlling life year after, like, that's why I went to work for Tony Robbins. I did incantations for 40 minutes a day. I took cold showers, I ate dog food, and I got mediocre result after mediocre result. And then when I quit, everything started flowing in and my head exploded. So I don't try to, the only thing I try to control is me. And sometimes I don't even try to control me because I try to dial into my natural flow and instinct of how I want to operate, because the more I follow my unique path in life, the more successful and more happy and more abundant I become.
So I can see somebody taking from this conversation, like, you said earlier, step one. All right, step one is
Yeah.
to decide
Yeah.
I'm going to increase my business 20-fold. All
Yeah.
right. And let's say they didn't at whatever time period they say. Then there's a component of disappointment. I often call this the goal paradox. Like, we have to have those big goals, but how do we do that without setting ourselves up for disappointment? So let's say they don't achieve that. What do
Yeah.
you reflect back on? Do you reflect back on lack of, was it a lack of believability? You said it but didn't believe it. Like, what do you encourage your clients to look back on if they state that goal but they don't get it?
Well, I typically will look at the how they set the goal and where the goal came from first. Um, I found that if you're setting the goal in the known, which is like, how to do this business, and you want to grow it incremental, you can absolutely set goals from the future backwards and go after those. But if we're setting big goals, like I want to grow my business 1,000%, we have to work with life for that to happen because we don't know. What I've found is those type of goals work much better when you don't set timeframes on them and you become non-specific. Because when I grew my business from 100,000 to 1,000,000 in 1 year, 700,000 of that was in Q4. So
Hmm.
exponential growth, impossible goals is usually non-linear. So I will really check with the person on alignment is like, really, okay, so yes, you missed that target. Did you really want that target, or is that a target you think you should want? Right? Is that a socially conditioned target, or is that an internal target? So I use 3 specific goal setting questions, and I can share those. The first question is, what do you want? And that's a great question. Write that down. The thing to notice is that question is a reference off of past reference. That's where it comes from. Then you ask yourself, what is possible? Write that answer down. Your brain will give you an answer based on external reference. Then the next question is, what is impossible but would be a lot of fun? And you actually get an internal instinctive answer that when the client says it, they say it like it's ridiculous. Then after about 30 seconds, they're like, yes. So it's literally intuitive targets. Now it's like, maybe you got a small business owner that's making $80,000 and they want financial freedom. So maybe the target is, hey, and they're excited about making $1 million in a year. Don't say I'm going to make $1 million this year. Say I'm going to make $1 million in a year, because I'm sure they'd take it next year too. So it allows us to be more open, because when we put timeframes on them, we get stressed as soon as we're out of alignment. So the lack of progress towards a timed goal creates misalignment.
And I just want to reiterate that third question. Like what would seem impossible but be a lot of fun?
Yes.
You know, as soon as you said that, I actually felt my own body go through the process of,
Yeah.
you know, that being unobtainable, but then real quickly suddenly it's like, it's believable. Like it is a quick shift. It can be, if you, again, as you said earlier, are attuned to your body and pay attention to that. So I think that's a fantastic
So what was your
question.
impossible goal?
I don't know that I set it. Just was more of a feeling initially, because it was all, in the course of a conversation, it's happening quickly. It's beyond what I think my business can generate. I know that. Like when you said it, I was just like, yeah, it could be that, without even attaching a number to it, just bigger than, because I'm at a point in my life where sometimes I question whether I'm putting ceilings on things because, the need isn't as driven as it was in the past, or, the runways are getting a little shorter, if you will. I still hopefully have a lot of years ahead of me, but, you start thinking a little differently. So, sometimes I question, sometimes I would love to have that ceilingless existence that I felt in my 20s, because I really did. It was just like, it was sky's the limit. Where as we mature, I can feel a little bit of an inclination to ceiling. And again, that's not all bad either, because part of that ceiling is driven by how I want to live. And I don't really want a multi-million business, or maybe I do. Like I said, that kind of the same conversation. Maybe I do. It just has to look maybe it has to look a way I don't know yet.
Yeah. And
I just don't want to work very hard.
Well, that's true. Right. And so my whole thing is like, aim at the known as best you can. Okay. Last year I did 100. We're going to aim at 120, but at the same time, be open for radical growth. My business is going to explode. I'm going to have a multi-million-dollar business, and I'm going to work 10 hours a week. Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly it. I think the ceiling is that I'm just really, at this point in my life, and I've always been somebody who made business decisions based on how I wanted to live first. And I promote that heavily. It's like life choices first, make your business fit that. So at this point, it's like, I'm very clear on the protection of my personal life and the protection of time I have to myself and my well-being. But you're right. I mean, the impossible is I haven't really thought about how big it can be and fit within that container.
And what you may not be seeing from the present frame is that it may be something you love so much that it's no longer work.
Yeah.
And then you don't care how many hours you work.
Exactly. And that is and that is definitely how I feel about my work. I want to talk about one of the possible mindset blocks to much of this. And you shared openly in the book your own challenges with it. And I've seen this in a number of my coaching clients. And it's the idea of there's a certain amount of fear, guilt, shame about far exceeding financially the environment from which you came from.
Yeah.
And, honestly, I know I actually had somebody recently ask me, which was really, I actually really loved being asked this question, because nobody's ever asked me. And I think this was somebody who saw themselves at the brink of a big breakthrough.
Yeah.
And she asked me, she goes, is it uncomfortable today with your family because of how much more successful you are? And nobody's ever been open enough to ask that of me. And I was so grateful, because I'm like, yeah, it's kind of tough. And we got to talk about how it's tough for others, but how my own process. And you spoke about that in the book a little bit too. And I do see that as something that holds a fair number of people back, a certain amount of survival guilt, almost as if you succeed. So share maybe your own story and how you encourage us to manage that.
Yeah. And that's, and for me, it showed up a lot around money. Like financially is how it had manifested in my life. And like, for example, like in 2003, I was in a tech sales job and I was making 120,000 a year, and I was excited, and I was already making like 3 times what most of my family made. And I had a job opportunity, and I was ready to go to a different company. I wanted to make more money. So I interviewed with this other company, was referred to the job by a former peer of mine, and was literally I've always been in sales. So like I'd get 97% of the jobs I interviewed for. That was my history. Go to this one. We're walking into, me and the hiring director just met him. We're walking into the room, to the conference room. And before we sit down, he's already introducing me to the staff as the new guy. And I'm just like, woohoo. We sit down, and the first thing he says is, this is a 200K job. And I was like, yes. And then I proceeded to have the worst interview of my entire life, to the point where he wouldn't even respond to my email.
Oof.
And I was like, what? How? I tried to control him. I tried to force it. I tried all this. I just started talking over him. And it took me years before I realized what happened. It wasn't until I started becoming a coach that I understood what happened. And what happened was, at the time, I thought rich people were greedy. And if I make more money, is going to equate to not lack of acceptance and love by my family. So my subconscious mind fixed it and kept me safe.
Yeah. Yeah. And I said, I've seen it a number of times. I almost like I kind of refer to as survivor's guilt, like the guilt that people
Yeah.
feel if they're a lone survivor of a plane crash, that there's a profound guilt that can show up in some people. And what they wind up doing is sabotaging their contentment in some way. I won't say that they necessarily give away all the money, but they probably overspend, right? So they close the gap between where they actually are and where they came from. They close the gap as much as they can. And it can really be something that holds somebody up. It's funny, you spoke a second ago, and I think I'd never really looked at it quite this way, but I guess in a way I've always kind of known that one of my greatest advantages in life is that I had the opportunity to spend decades as a photographer for super affluent people, because I, like much of middle America, or quite honestly, lower middle America, from where I came from, heard all the stereotypes about successful and wealthy people. First of all, kind of the idea is that everybody that had money was given it from their family. It was a silver spoon. And I ended up being the photographer for a clientele that, by and large, while they had good education, came from good backgrounds, they weren't handed the money. And you know why? Because people are living longer. Their parents still needed their money. It wasn't like people just didn't. And I saw this of my clients. I saw my own clients, when their kids, I was doing this for so many decades, that as their kids got older, they don't just give away the money. So people weren't starting with this huge financial advantage that we think. But one thing I always saw was that they didn't fit any of the stereotypes, right? I mean, these were just really, these were folks that were successful, driven by mindset. They had a way of thinking about their lives and their success. They were open to me being in their lives, even though I didn't come from their world, because I believe they saw something in me that, my own potential. I just found it to be so much more a profound experience that, thankfully for me, it unleashed any stereotypes and prejudgments about what it meant to be successful and financially stable. And so I think one thing to do is to really look carefully at your own stereotypes and question whether they aren't blocking where you ultimately would like to go.
Yeah. And also, I wish I would have known back then, is that, like, the journey to what I call your journey to greatness in your own life it's a solo journey. You're climbing your mountain over here by yourself, and someone else is climbing their mountain over here. So the next person climbing a mountain like you is, like, really far away. And even more today than 10 years ago is that whatever business journey of success you were on is really underneath it, wrapped in your own personal growth. Because as you grow to higher business impact and success and financial success, you have to transform to the person that's at that frequency.
Yeah. Or in challenges, if you'd like, I almost flip it the other way around, because what I repeatedly say, that you have to develop yourself first, right? I look at it and I refer to it as capacity. It's like you have to increase your capacity. And often, as we were just speaking, one of those capacities that needs to be raised is what I would call to the deserving ceiling. Like, until you believe you deserve more, you can put all the hard work you want in, and it's not going anywhere. It's just you on a hamster wheel. So I tend to always turn, as I said right in the intro, I always turn to personal development first. How do I need to increase my capacity of belief? How do I need to increase my capacity of what I believe is possible, or just believing the impossible? But I always turn to what I need to do inside first before I bother getting into action, because otherwise you're just working hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, and we market, I market the business as, business coaching, life coaching, performance coaching, but 80% of what we do is self-alignment in there. Wow. And it's always part of the process. And what so people think that I help people create success, but I actually don't. I basically just remove all the resistance to it.
Yeah. Good point.
That's it. Because we're infinite beings. There's nothing we can't do or learn. And we're literally just in our own way over our expectations. So it's almost like people would be better if you could give them amnesia. Yeah. And then they could just start to be open. Because as soon as we start to become free and start to think more open about worthiness, because money the way I think about money is I think money is like air. It's everywhere. And the amount of money you have is equal to the financial frequency of life you're living in. It has nothing to do with it. Like there's no limit to the amount of money on the planet. There can be a company that doesn't exist today and tomorrow is worth $1 billion that wasn't there yesterday, right? There's no limit. But money makes people dumb. Like it literally makes people dumb. Like, because we learn new things all the time. We learn how to use our phone or a new app or whatever, but learn how to make more money. Oh, I don't know how.
Well,
Right?
yeah, I just say, whatever one thinks of cryptocurrency and the whole world, that what I think it's doing is making us rethink money. I just think it's really
Yeah.
fascinating,
Yeah.
just to imagine just a whole other way of an existence of money, and what the unknown of that can open up for some people as to how they think about money. I
Yeah.
mean, it's kind of crazy. One last thing I want to ask you about, because is the difference between awareness and visualization, right?
Mhm.
Because visualization is so often given as a tool
Mhm.
for laws of attraction, manifestation,
Yeah.
other things, and you focus more on awareness. So
Yeah.
separate the two.
Yeah. So when I figured out how to frame shift, um, I was actually overwhelmed. My business was, when we were going through that 10x growth, I was completely overwhelmed. And I had this idea that basically was like, I'm completely overwhelmed right now. A month ago, had everything dialed in, but I realized if you took Jason 10 years ago and brought him to a month ago, he would have been completely overwhelmed.
Hmm.
So that tells me that there's a version of me in the future that if I bring that version here, I wouldn't be overwhelmed. And and I did it. Then I came to realize that. So when I guide people into that, I use the word sense, awareness. Like, can you get a sense of a version of you in the future who has that thing? Or can you get a sense of a version of you who knows what to do? Because we're basically aligning ourselves with life to let us flow through. Get a sense is almost like you're at the stoplight in your car and you know that person's looking at you and you're not looking at them,
Yeah.
right? You're not using one of your five senses. You're using another sense.
Yeah. Or you look at them and you just know they're going to turn around because they know you're
Yes.
looking at them, right? It's a
We're,
fun
we're
game.
sensing it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Visualization happens at the mindset level. That's in the mind.
Mhm.
So you can't shift your frame from visualization because you're still in the same frame. So it's when you get a sense of it. When I get a sense of the version of me, I literally sense the presence of the frame.
Mm.
Like I can feel it right there. Like everybody's different. Some people feel it here, some people feel it internally. And then you're basically using your focus held on an elevated frequency to shift to that just by holding it there for 30 seconds.
Wow. And I want to encourage everyone, if, first of all of this frame shifting begins with believing it can. Right.
Yeah.
So let's start with fundamentally with that. And if you are in any doubt, if this all just sounds too woo woo, too out of it for you, again, what I encourage you to do is pay attention to patterns. Pay attention to where you're hearing similar ideas coming from multiple sources. I think that is a profound indicator of truth, because we start or shift. And I can almost guarantee you, with all that we've been lucky enough to hear Jason disclose to us, and I've shared my perspectives, and I have the advantage of speaking to so many people through this podcast. It
Mhm.
is unbelievable how often there are similar messages being dropped in, and it's like watching the world and life and how it works change as we go. And I encourage everybody, just pay attention to whether you're hearing similar messages from multiple sources, and align with that and realize there's something presenting itself to you as an opportunity. All right. So before I let you go, Jason, we're going to end with our rapid round around the acronym of SELF. The S stands for sustainability. What's one daily habit you have that sustains you?
It's really connecting with my family, my wife, my boys. I got 4 boys, so taking time to connect with them after work, that fills me up and recharges me.
I was the youngest of 3 boys, so your youngest and I can get together and probably share some trauma. The E in self stands for elevate. What's one thing you suggest we can do to elevate our business?
Aim higher.
Hmm, love that. The L stands for let's go. What's one action step you would love for us to take even today?
Stop taking yourself so seriously.
I need to
And
work on
have
that one.
fun.
That's awesome. The F in self stands for facing a challenge. With all that you've accomplished, what's one challenge you still face?
The major growth area for me is my physical body. I tell myself my story is that I have a really tough mindset, so I was really good at suffering. So right now is fighting to get back into shape is my biggest obstacle.
I hear you. Awesome. So, Jason, tell us the best way to find out more about you, your book, and your work.
Yeah, you can find me at jasondreescoaching.com. You can also find Instagram is great. I put out a ton of free content there. And that's the best way to find me. I also do live events as well.
Good to know. I'll be following you on Instagram, so I recommend the rest of you do that as well. And of course, you'll also find those links at our show notes at jeffreyshaw.com. And hey, as I've been saying lately, if you're listening to this in the traditional podcast form, just know that we are also live streaming the interviews weeks before they are put out as a podcast on both YouTube. So hop on over to my YouTube channel. You'll find me at Jeffrey Shaw Author on YouTube. Subscribe there. Also, my Facebook business page. We're live streaming it there. It's kind of fun to get the behind the scenes. And as we've seen with Jason today, he used a lot of hand motions to explain what he's talking about. And you don't get that advantage on a podcast. So, hey, take in both. Take in the podcast, take in the live streams. Jason, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for the invite, Jeff. It's great to connect today.
Awesome. Remember, you may be in business for yourself, but you are not in business by yourself. Be your best self, be proud, and keep changing the world.